To try to give you an overall picture of the situation on the battlefield throughout Iraq and Syria, we're joined now from Washington by Anthony Cordesman. He is with the Center for Strategic and International Studies and was a director of intelligence assessment in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. So let's start in northeastern Syria, where the U.S. has been striking Islamic State positions near its headquarters in Raqqa, and where intense fighting has occurred this week between Kurdish forces and ISIS in Kobani, near the Turkish border. What's the latest from Syria?
Well, actually, the number of strikes have been relatively limited. This is not, as yet, an intensive air campaign. There are probably around 250 strikes and a little over 40 cruise missiles. The area in the Turkish border is a particularly troubled area because the Islamic State is pushing hard to essentially push the Syrian Kurds out of the area to take control of the border areas with Turkey. That gives them leverage over Turkey. It's pushing out an opponent which had been allied with the Iraqi Kurds. At the same time, there have been strikes inside Syria which have attacked key command posts, refineries, the economic lifelines of the Islamic States. But these are still early days. It's not yet an intensive or sustained campaign that's going to make a critical difference.
How about the situation in northern Iraq? A lot of Americans are familiar with the rescue operation that we participated in to try to help the Yazidis get off the Sinjar mountain area. But ISIS still controls Mosul and much of that region.
No one has suggested at any point in the administration or in the U.S. Joint Chiefs that these airstrikes are going to drive the Islamic State out of northern and western Iraq. So far, the airstrikes, when they've been successful in Iraq, have largely been close air support really helping specific Iraqi or Kurdish forces that were threatened by the Islamic State. There have only been two very minor attempts at a counteroffensive to drive inside the areas occupied the Islamic State, and both of these have really failed. And in areas where there have been some gains in holding the offensives, you still seen the Islamic State find other ways to go on the offensive against other towns and places.
ISIS also controls several cities within about 50 miles of Baghdad, and this week we heard new reports about their fighters defeating Iraqi government troops even closer to the capital. So my question is Baghdad itself in any danger?
Most of what we're seeing are attacks of small towns along the river that were held by small, isolated Iraqi army garrisons. Some of these had 400, some of them had 800 people. They're not in the Shiite areas, they're not in the urban areas in Baghdad, they're not dealing with the larger Iraqi forces. But it is disturbing that these have been gains that are to the west, to some extent to the immediate south, and in a few areas to the north of Baghdad. Yes, they're still in rural areas, but in each case where there's been a push against the Iraqi forces, they haven't been supplied. Areas or attempts to relieve them under pressure haven't worked. They've appealed for support from the Iraqi forces. They've been given all kinds of promises, and nothing has been delivered. And this reflects a much broader issue. The U.S. assessments are that there are about 26 brigades, that's a large force, still left in the Iraqi forces. It's also that about half of those are sectarian, they're Shiite, they're not really supporting the national forces, or they're simply not militarily effective. And that virtually all of the others are going to require advisory support, arms supplies, better command and control to be effective. So as yet, we're holding, but the airstrikes are not really crippling the Islamic State in any meaningful way.
Right, Anthony Cordesman joining us from Washington. Thanks so much.
A pleasure.